that you'll be able to see more detail about them. And I actually follow Dan on Twitter and follow some of his postings about food, football, and other things, and quite interesting as it goes along. So please welcome Dan Harbeke from Union Pacific.
Well, good morning, everybody. Peter, thank you. And I want to begin by just making two brief remarks. The first is I tip my hat to Peter and the Texas Rail Advocates. This event is so impressive in how it gathers those across the rail industry, passenger and freight, our service providers in the industry, our state and local leaders who know the importance of these issues. And the fact that you've done this for so many years and continue to have strong support is really something to be proud of. The second piece, on a more personal note, is this event holds a special place, I guess, in my heart, because it was about 2 years ago that my wife and I relocated to North Texas, to Fort Worth. We had lived in Salt Lake for about 7 years, and before that, Omaha, Nebraska. And we were also expecting our first child. And of course, she's almost 2 now. But anybody who's made that kind of transition in their life, moving, child perhaps, all very, very good, positive things to be excited about, but those are very vivid moments in your life. And I think many of us who have been through that call to mind those moments. And I recall being here because it was during that transition that I think I really first set foot in North Texas. And when you come to a place where it's unfamiliar and you have a lot to learn, and people are so welcoming, so gracious, that sticks with you. And so I tip my hat certainly to Peter, to this organization, but I tip my hat to those in North Texas across the state who have been so welcoming to me and our family and have made this a wonderful transition. So thank you for that. As we get into the presentation here, I want to talk about how Union Pacific and freight rail can serve the needs of a growing economy, but some of you may not be familiar with UP. And so it's always fun to go through a little bit of the history. Now, Union Pacific was created, for those who don't know, and this may be something to tweet for those who are interested, is your fun fact of the day. It was Abraham Lincoln who signed the Pacific Rail Act on July 1, 1862, that created Union Pacific. Pretty remarkable. And we had our 150th anniversary here in 2012. And who can tell me where this photo is? Promontory Summit. I was waiting for it. You can always tell you're in a room full of rail fans when they point out it's Promontory Summit and not Promontory Point. I won't belabor where that falls on a map, but this is Promontory Summit, the driving of the Golden Spike. And as much as any railroad person would want to talk about our history at length, I'll leave it here, but I put this here as a teaser for what we have coming here in just over 2 years, which is the 150th celebration of the driving of the Golden Spike, May 10th, 1869, and here in 2019, Union Pacific is in the process of gearing up for this celebration, and we will soon be releasing information on the activities we have planned across our network. Obviously, most focused on that particular line, but I assure you we'll be doing things company-wide, and stay tuned. And so let me introduce you to Union Pacific. We are the nation's largest freight railroad, headquartered in Omaha, Nebraska. We operate in 23 states west of the Mississippi, 32,000 plus miles of track. And you can see from the Gulf Coast ports to our 6 interchange points or gateways with Mexico, the access we have through the West Coast ports, our Canadian interchange in Idaho directly, as well as where we interchange in Illinois and Minnesota. And you can also see where we interchange with our eastern partners as well. Now, not only are we the largest railroad in the country, we are also the largest railroad in Texas. And of our 23 states, as you can see from the footprint there, Texas is the #1 franchise, if you will, for us in terms of track miles and employees. We have just over 6,000 miles of track here in Texas and just shy of 8,000 employees. And speaking of Mexico, you can see that of all the rail freight back and forth between the United States and Mexico, 70% of that comes on Union Pacific alone. And that's no small thing. When you think about the fact that Mexico is the United States' second largest export market and top 3 in imports, that is a big deal. And for UP, that represents about 10% of our business, split across all commodities and split between north and southbound moves. And of course, you all know the thousands of products we ship. It's always fun to be in a room like this with people like you all, where you think about, you got up this morning, you turned on the lights, likely powered by coal or the wind energy components that we ship. You turned on the TV or went for a jog, those tennis shoes and TVs likely came on a container. You think about, you probably came here, some by rail, but some presumably by car, and how the fact that we ship about 70% of all finished vehicles west of the Mississippi, and we're about to enjoy a lunch with probably some lettuce and some bread that at some point probably had a piece of our freight business. And so you can see, Jeff, this slide is for you in terms of our commodity breakdown. You can see how we break down all of the thousands of commodities that we ship into 6 major groups, the smallest of which is our automotive group. But as I mentioned, it's significant in terms of the fact that we touch 3 out of 4 cars west of the Mississippi, and here in North Texas with our vehicle distribution center in Mesquite and factories like General Motors, which recently announced a major expansion in Arlington. There's absolutely a place here in North Texas for that business, split mostly between parts and vehicles. You can see our agricultural business. That's your grains, your grain products, your fresh and frozen foods, your canned and packaged foods. It's your beer and wine. And anyone who knows me in my short time here in Texas knows that I like a good burger. And I get giddy every time I go to a Five Guys, because you see those big bags of Idaho potatoes that ship exclusively on Union Pacific. Brings a smile to my face every time. You can see our chemicals business. That's your plastics, your fertilizers. Our crude oil business is included in there, your heavy, your industrial chemicals. Our industrial products business, sometimes people refer to that as everything else. It's your lumber, your steel, your minerals that fall into that category, your aggregate product. Our coal business, which has declined a bit over time, but still is primarily made up of our Powder River Basin coal out of Wyoming, which represents about 80% of our coal business, with the remaining 20% rounded out between Colorado and Utah. And finally, our intermodal business, which is our container business, which is really our consumer goods, both international and domestic. And as we serve our customers safely and efficiently, the way we're able to do that is by investing in our infrastructure. And you can see the amount that we had here just this last year, $3.6 billion. And you think about, somebody mentioned, I believe, last evening in terms of what we invest industry-wide for safety in our infrastructure, and how the railroad industry leads out across all industries in terms of the percent of revenue we're putting back into our infrastructure. When you look at our revenue and what our capital spend is, it represents about 17% of what we're putting back into our business. And roughly half of that, just over half, is our replacement cost, just to turn the lights on to keep things running. That, on average, per day represents about 10,000 ties and 3 miles of rail that we're putting in every day. And the other half of that is really for capacity for growth, facilities, new equipment and technology. And also, it was mentioned earlier about positive train control. We spent just shy of $400 million last year. And by the time it's all said and done, Union Pacific will probably be in just shy of $3 billion. And why that's so important, and I have to give such credit to this organization. You know you're in the right place when they start with a safety briefing, whether it was dinner last night or this meeting here today. We don't kid around when we talk about safety. It is that important. It is a culture for us. And so you can see here how we look at it in terms of employees, equipment, and public. On the employee side, whether it's our total safety culture, our courage to care, which in our case is where having the courage to speak up, stop the line, and say something if you see something unsafe, but also having the courage as an employee to hear that and make a change. And whether you're operating heavy equipment, a locomotive, you're driving your employee vehicle, or you're in a corporate environment back in Omaha, Nebraska, it matters to every single employee. On the equipment side, our customer side, whether it's damage prevention, whether it's the technology to detect defects in rail and wheels before they happen, to isolate and address those concerns, those numbers have improved over time. And finally, on crossing safety, there are a number of partners here that we work with. I think of Operation Lifesaver and their work across all of our states where we operate. And some who were here last year recall the presentation we gave on some of the new media that we've put out. And speaking of Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, I would pause to encourage you, if you don't friend or follow UP, to do so. And to find, I think we actually played a video last evening and may play one here today, in terms of one of our campaigns, Your Life is Worth the Wait. And it is that important, and there's nobody better than those in this room to help us spread that message. But of course, it's not just UP, it's the industry. And you are all here to be thanked for your efforts over time and the improvements that we've made. And so that's a bit about UP. And want to transition into how UP and freight rail can serve the needs of a growing economy. And I look to that phrase there that we all know. You've seen this word a few times here, and if you've been in Texas long, you know the phrase well. Everything is bigger in Texas. And in my short time, I've found that to be true. And with that, to me, that sets up perfectly, while everything is bigger, so too is the growth that we're experiencing here in Texas. And so just to put this in perspective, you see some of the statistics here. 650 people move to Texas every day. And in North Texas in particular, we grow by one person every 5 minutes. So we're at least up to a couple. And the fact that North Texas will be 17 million people between now and 2050. And just for perspective, it was recently announced here in North Texas that the DFW Metroplex is now the third largest metro in the country. New York, Los Angeles, DFW. We overtook Chicago. Now it was marginal perhaps, 7.3 to 7.1, and if you, for those of us who perhaps live and work in Fort Worth, there are some people who are very pleased to see that maybe perhaps over time Fort Worth will actually grow and surpass Dallas in population. Think about that for a second for those who have been here for any amount of time, the fact that Fort Worth's population will surpass that of Dallas. That is remarkable. TxDOT and others pay attention to these trends and have acknowledged and show with some concern the growth in freight over time and what that represents to each one of us who requires 40 tons annually of freight. I'm not sure with New Year's resolutions that makes me feel very good that I require 40 tons of freight. But that is a big deal, and when you take that times 1 million people here and 1 million people here, you understand how impactful that can be. Now, growth is good for so many ways. You can see here the increase in jobs, improvement in jobs, wages, the tax receipts, the improvements that come along with that, new schools for our kids. Remarkably good things come with growth. Just yesterday, the Dallas Regional Chamber announced that here's another Twitter announcement here. In the last 6 years, 2010 to 2016, there have been 72 corporate relocations to North Texas. Is that not amazing? And 17 just last year. So you think about Toyota and their 4,000 employees. Not every move is that large, but that is substantial and not to be missed in terms of what is coming to not only the state, but this part of the state in particular. But as you think about what that means in terms of challenges, oftentimes what ranks at the top of the list is congestion, whether it's you and I sitting in traffic trying to get to a place where we want to go, whether it's a truck that needs to get where it needs to go, the safety concerns with putting more and more stress and freight and people on our roadways and other means of transport, the emissions concerns of idling cars, idling vehicles, idling trucks. There are enormous concerns and constraints, not just on the road infrastructure, but the need for hospitals, the need for police and fire, and those facilities that we all rely on. And so what are we doing about it? Union Pacific and freight rail already is playing a role in terms of this growth coming online, and I've highlighted just a few items here. In West Texas in particular, you think of all the growth, and this is not unique to West Texas, but to point out one example, what's happening in West Texas with frac sand, the facilities coming online, with the help of our short line partners, being able to support those facilities not only for the growth in the energy sector and what's happening out there and their jobs, but also making sure that that product moves by rail and not by road, given some of the stresses that they have witnessed in that part of the state. And so UP and freight rail are playing a role in that part of the state in the energy industry. But you think about maybe perhaps down south, Houston, South Texas, some refer to it as the stone-starved beast. You think about the fact that when you dig a little bit there, you hit sand. Where you go a little bit further north, there are rock formations in San Antonio and Austin, and the freight rail industry, UP, are incredibly well positioned to source that rock, again, with the help of some of our shortline partners, to source that rock, take that rock off of our roads and highways, to build roads and highways and homes, and even from a municipal perspective, some of the underground piping and footings for buildings to accommodate this new growth. So it is having a direct impact in Texas, whether it's central or south, in terms of reducing that stress on our infrastructure and accommodating for that growth. Now, those last two examples are something we've seen over the last several years. Our rock and aggregate business has come online and been fairly strong. What you've seen in West Texas, while it's ebbed and flowed here over time, is fairly well established and continues to grow. But we're also well positioned for new moves in the marketplace. One of these moves is what's happening with respect to plastic pellets and the global demand for plastics. And at the same time, credit to the industries here in this state, in the Gulf Coast region in particular, the supply that's coming online to meet that demand for plastic pellets. And so I want to highlight one of our services that we have that when you talk about growth and how freight rail and UP can accommodate that growth, Dallas to dock is one of those. And as you'll see in the illustration here in a moment, really what that is moving those plastic pellets in our traditional carload service from the Gulf Coast to Dallas, where Dallas today is a consumer market, meaning we make containers empty here in North Texas. We have a supply to move those containers and the capacity to move those containers. We carload it here to Dallas. Thanks to customers and packagers, that is packaged and positioned into intermodal cars for our premium intermodal service heading west for export, and we'll see that played out here. And so as you mentioned, where it's produced here in the Gulf Coast, packaged, shipped north, taking that stress off of I-45, for example. We made a major announcement with a plastics packager named KTN, who will be locating in what I'll describe here in a moment as Prime Point, which is a major rail-served facility next to our intermodal terminal, packaged and put in containers and shipped to West Coast for export. And so to highlight Dallas to dock, you talk about this emerging marketplace and the growth that we anticipate. You can see the tonnage, but we anticipate this marketplace to grow by 37% over the next 5 years. And for those who may not be familiar, what we refer to as our Dallas Intermodal Terminal, or DIT, is just south of Dallas on I-45 in the Wilmer and Hutchins area. That facility just turned 10 last year. And like many of our facilities, we plan for growth, we plan for that modernization, and that's what we are underway with now, is modernizing that facility in terms of how trucks come and leave that facility and how we expand the footprint to accommodate this growth. And so that is underway. At the same time, you have a terrific amount of development happening in Dallas County. One example to point to is Prime Point, which, as I mentioned earlier, is a 3,000-acre rail-served facility just west or adjacent to Union Pacific's intermodal terminal. Positioning Union Pacific and those customers and the economies that need to grow, taking those stresses off and putting them on rail where we have the capacity to grow in our facilities, in our network, and the confidence to be able to do so. And so all of that to say, at the end of the day, that Union Pacific and the freight rail industry, we view ourselves as your partner in addressing the growth that we anticipate and how freight can play a role there. Now, I think as some of the statistics showed, and some of us in our own industries know, the people are coming, the freight is coming, and whether you think that's a good thing or bad, we would posture that that's a good thing, and that the benefits outweigh the challenges. But that's probably only going to come to pass if we look at solutions to be able to handle that growth, and we believe multimodal solutions are the way to address that growth. Now, you can see how Union Pacific has planned and invested here in the South. Those numbers ought to come across as staggering. Those are huge numbers, and just this last year alone, we spent $513 million in Texas to grow our capacity and harden our infrastructure to be able to handle this. But I think we also know, and as you've heard it mentioned here this morning, we cannot do it alone. We rely on those public and private partnerships with those agencies where it makes sense. And so whether it's here locally with the Tower 55 or some other project that makes sense for the state and for local economies to accommodate this growth, we want to be your partner at the table to think in ways and think in creative ways of how we can address the growth that is coming. And as we like to say so often in the freight rail industry, we can handle it. Thank you very much. Peter says, I guess if there's questions, I'll defer to you. Yes, sir.
You guys develop that park yourself, or do you do it with a developer do it with you, or how did you guys handle that?
Sure. The question was with respect to Prime Point.
Yes.
So that is a private development. Prime Point is its own developer, and that facility has come online over the last several years. Union Pacific will be the freight rail provider for that facility.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
How does the Panama Canal expansion going to affect our transport and the West Coast operations there for the Union Pacific? Do we see a lot of advantages there, or just a whole lot more challenges?
Sure. A question on Panama Canal and its impact. And I don't work on that side of the house, so I want to be a little careful in terms of how, staying away from any speculation. But the short answer in terms of how we view it is really we don't believe there has been or will be any great change in terms of the flow of the commodities that we see today on our network. Yes, sir.
In terms of the implementation of climate change, where does she be on that issue we need to think about?
The question on positive train control, but in particular, where are we on the Texas routes? We've got, my word, I'll say testing happening all across our network. I don't know specifically what routes or lines today we have in Texas, but we will meet the obligation before the deadline to have it in place and running.
That deadline is December 31/15 to December 31/17?
I believe 2018,
2018?
yes.
Okay.
And not having that information because it's pretty wide-reaching, but we made an announcement recently in terms of what our progress is in terms of locomotives that are being outfitted, the facilities and the tracks that are being outfitted. We've got probably 1,000 people company-wide committed just to PTC alone, and so it is a massive effort, and I would direct you to up.com to see the announcement about a month ago.
So you feel that within that 2-year extension, you should be complete with the PCC?
Correct.
Excellent.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
So I know that in Mexico there has been you mentioned the Mexican operations earlier, and I know that in that country there has been a move to open their petroleum industry to private investment. Do you anticipate that that will change or alter the flow of plastics that you described in this?
That is a great question, and don't fault me for this, but we have our fourth quarter earnings next week, and that is very much a commercially driven discussion. And so being mindful of the publicly traded nature of our company, I would probably defer to our earnings release next week on the 19th. Yes, sir.
Metro area in Austin, Texas. As you know, we had a hope on a Lone Star Rail District, a commuter rail between Austin and San Antonio that had been in the works for a long time. And we totally understand that the frustration of Union Pacific in not being able for the district to complete the project and get moving with a commuter rail sharing your corridor. Knowing the stress of metropolitan areas and the growth that are occurring in Texas, like everybody is talking about, Central Texas is really exploding, just like this area. Unfortunately, the road infrastructure in that area really doesn't have the capacity or mimics what the north area in the state has. So we're pretty constrained, and we continue to explore opportunities for expanding public transit. The Union Pacific corridor through the city of Austin and through the northern cities of Georgetown, Round Rock, and then on the south, San Marcos, Cal Buda. It's a great opportunity to help us improve some of the mobility conditions that we have. Will Union Pacific will be open to continue to explore and have these conversations about sharing the corridor for commuter use?
Sure, no, and that's a fair question. I will say I work a lot in that area. I know that area fairly well. There's probably two ways to look at that, and this is a discussion that would need, quite frankly, a lot more time. So I don't take my brevity as anything other than trying to be mindful of our time here on such a large issue. But there's really to provide the data necessary to inform that discussion, and without relitigating all of that, the conclusion was that there were a number of factors that led to us not being able to make it work in our view. And when that became apparent, and you consider, among many things, the public dollars flowing in, it was important to us that we share that message, share that message timely, to be direct about it and to see what other options there might be. And so it's unfortunate that it wasn't able to move forward, but it wasn't without a terrific amount of study and thought on everybody's part. We're certainly willing to keep the dialogue open with those communities. We have a franchise there today, and that will continue. But what future iteration we might see of that is to us unknown at this time. But we'll continue that relationship with those cities, with the MPOs, to review whatever it might be that they put across the table.
Has Union Pacific ever considered any thought of getting back into the passenger business, particularly in short routes like a Dallas to Houston run?
Well, now you got me all excited, but but for a variety of reasons. The short answer is no. That's the short answer. But you get me excited because UP does play a role in passenger operations today, whether it's in California, operations in downtown Chicago with the Metra. And having worked in the Mountain West for a number of years, I get excited about the history of passenger rail. You think about, we saw it with the Florida presentation and how UP built into many of our national parks. Built the first, here's your cocktail party trivia, and forgive me, but the first chairlift in the world for skiing was designed by Union Pacific Railroad. And so while I get excited about and honor our legacy in passenger rail, we have no plans to get into passenger rail today. Thank you all.